Hello, my name is Dan Sokulski. I'm a recovery support specialist with Chestnut Health Systems and a member of the McLean County ROSC, and we welcome you back to our YouTube channel. Hopefully you're checking us out early and often and liking what you see and passing along anything you deem appropriate to friends, family. That's kind of the purpose, is to share this information. I've been asking a lot of people to share their story in our community, their story of recovery on this channel, and figured that if I'm going to ask other people, I should probably do it myself. So today I'm here to tell my story of recovery. Normally when I do this from a podium, I have notes that I spend days preparing and never refer to. This time we're just going to kind of wing it. I figure it's my story. Who knows it better than me? As we say, speak from the heart. And usually it goes fine when that happens. So I was born and raised in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, born in Schaumburg at 4 years old, moved to South Barrington, which is a pretty affluent community. My parents were married, still are, had their 50th anniversary a few years ago. We went on family trips. My dad coached baseball, travel teams. My mom, brother, sister were always at the games. We did the same for my siblings' events. I was the youngest of three, so it was a very good upbringing. I can't really point to anything in my childhood and say, you know, this was the moment or this was the source of me becoming an alcoholic. I would say one thing, kind of looking back, that I feared a little bit was my dad's temper. You know, if maybe we call him old school in today's society. He's definitely chilled big time over the years, but as a kid, you know, if we just get a little push it too far, that temper would come out, and that forced me to learn to lie at a young age to avoid consequences. And that dishonesty kind of carried with me throughout the years as just a way to avoid situations, with, you know, not necessarily confrontations, but conversations, dealing with situations, just kind of take that easier, softer path and avoid the situation, lie if I need to, you know, put it on the back burner. Graduated high school, went to Purdue University, graduated from there. I'd say, you know, in high school I was more of a, you know, the drinking and marijuana use definitely became regular, you know, around my junior, senior year, but it was still mostly like a weekend thing for, you know, in general. In college is when it definitely spiked. I remember as a sophomore, you know, it was the 1 year I was in a fraternity until I realized that wasn't a good fit. I guess you could say some more conservative guys in the house came up to myself and my group of friends and made a comment, man, you guys we've been counting, you guys have partied 16 straight nights, you know, and it was kind of like this big joke, haha, high fives, whatever. But in that moment, I remember that pretty clearly. I was just kind of one of those early moments of clarity where I realized that actually is not cool. Going back to college is when I remember lying awake, you know, in the middle of the night, 2, 3 in the morning with that stinking thinking, making resolutions that, you know, tomorrow I was going to stop or I was going to cut back. And, you know, sure thing, as soon as I see my friends or be walking into class, you know, I'd hit the pipe or, you know, we'd be partying again that night. And so I started to realize that, you know, there might be a problem. I was not even close at that point to considering myself an addict or an alcoholic. I was still very much in the mindset that this is something I can turn on and off and it's fun, you know, it's working right now. You know, I tell myself when I graduate, you know, I'll stop. And then I graduated and it continued to progress. Well, when I get married, you know, and settle down, you know, or when I start my career, when we have children, you know, all those things. But, you know, this is a progressive disease, so it's continuing to grow and strengthen within my brain, within my mind, my spirit, my body. Throughout my 20s, it was mostly regular alcohol and marijuana use. You know, I started with craft beers and, you know, good wines, and into my 30s, I got more into the heavier drugs, you know, and that idea of smoking crack by the fireplace in a robe with a good book, you know, just didn't really sort of fit my mindset of what I was thinking in terms of, you know, I could maybe do that years earlier, but when you start getting into those heavier drugs, it's all about needing that next fix, you know, not just wanting it, but needing it physically. And it started where, you know, I had a hangover one morning. I was working at State Farm, and I told a coworker, you know, I had a headache. We were walking back from this big tunnel, and he handed me a couple Vicodin and said, you know, hey, try these, you know, that'll help. And I actually didn't in the moment, and I'd had Vicodin a few times from, you know, a couple surgeries, or I'd, you know, sneak one or two from my parents if they had them in the medicine cabinet, but I was never my motto was not the death drugs, just alcohol, just marijuana. I've come to learn alcohol is very much a death drug. So anyway, I found out I liked the effect, that I wanted to stop drinking. I needed to. I still was unaware. I'd heard of 12-step programs. I heard of, treatment centers, but, that was still very far from my radar. I was not willing to, admit that I was powerless yet. Those pills would give me kind of a Superman effect, and then our daughter was born, shortly after. I'd use them for work travel, presentations. I would have in London, Munich, I had a good gig where a company was paying for a lot of travel. And there's also a lot of, alcohol abuse on those. Sometimes my wife would come along, and I remember one time in London, she was getting ready to leave the next morning. She had come out for a few nights. The conference was over, and I chose to party with coworkers and people from other organizations while she sat in the hotel room the whole night. I remember I'd bring her a beer, and then I'd go back out, tell her I'll be right back, just need another 10 minutes. And then, come 1 a.m, I roll in, and it was difficult. We got in a fight, and she left on bad terms. My wife has never had any issues with any kind of substances. She can easily have one, put it down. I don't think she's had even so much as a glass of wine in the last 10 years. She can go on weekend trips with friends, girls' weekends, and not touch it. When she was pregnant, it was no problem to stop. For the longest time, it was, these pep talks before family functions or weddings or getting together with friends, that I'm not going to drink too much and, make an ass out of myself or embarrass her, that kind of thing. As an alcoholic, once that alcohol's in my system, I lose that power of choice. There's sometimes I could limit myself, especially if I knew that all eyes were on me, but for the most part, once I put that stuff in my body, it's off to the races. Something, I have that peculiar mental twist that our literature talks about, where that phenomenon of craving sets in and that mental obsession takes over. And when I'm stuck in that obsession, the only thing that can diffuse that is drinking or using. So kind of getting back to the pill situation, I found that, it gave me energy when our daughter was born. I could wake up at 3 a.m. if she was crying, and then, take a couple Vicodin in the morning, go to work, and, sort of just have that pep in my step still. Again, that was another thing where I rationalized it by saying, well, it's, it'll help me quit drinking, right? That was actually what I thought, that if I switch to opiates, painkillers, then it will help with my drinking and my cannabis abuse. What ultimately happened is I just ended up with a physical dependence on opioids and was drinking more than ever, and moved on to booze, to vodka, started with Grey Goose or Stoli, that kind of thing, and by the end, it was gas station McCormick, whatever I could get my hands on. I drank all occasions, it wasn't when, work was tough or something was going on with the marriage. It wasn't something that triggered it. It was just all the time. I was pretty much especially by the end, drink all throughout the day. I'd have a water bottle full of vodka and just kind of sip off it. That, of course, led to some trouble with some jobs later on. Eventually with the opioids, the tolerance set in and started snorting Oxycontin, and then eventually started shooting roxicodone and Dilaudid. I found a resource in Florida and another one in Chicago where I could get both those fairly cheap, and I'd spend like $500 to get 80 of the 30 milligram roxicodones from Florida. That was back when they had those pain clinics all over, and it was just out of control. They were giving pills to anybody who walked in with any kind of spasm in their back or made up problem. There was somebody who didn't want them for herself. She was just cashing in, and I'd figure out 80, that'll last me a month. I'll space them out, and of course what happens is they're gone in 4 or 5 days. And so the amount that I was injecting was pretty ridiculous. And then I moved on to crack, and I was at this point addicted to the needle as well, the ritual of it, loading up the rig, watching the blood go in, all that stuff. Anyone who's used the needle probably knows what I'm talking about. And, the crack I would just melt in vinegar and just really tore up my arms, abscesses. It'd be 95 degrees in the middle of August and I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt, I remember one time we were driving up to my parents and I was driving and my sleeve had rolled up a little bit too much and my wife saw all these, just marks, track marks I had on my wrist because I got to a point where I ran out of veins, so I was looking for the tiniest things in my hand and my wrist that I could get to. And she's like, "What is that?" And I just made my buddy's cat, that kind of thing. Just the constant deception, the constant games with the marriage, my wife buying breathalyzers, and I'd sneak to the other room and use a turkey baster to quickly pump air into it, and then I'd come back and show her, "Hey, zero," the 20 questions anytime I was out longer than I said I would. Using my daughter's pee, when she wouldn't flush the toilet for drug tests, needles found around the house, empty bottles, it was just a constant insanity, and it affected not just me, as maybe addicts, we try to say, well, we're only harming ourselves, and maybe there's some truth to that in the beginning, but as the disease progresses, it makes the entire family ill. By 2008, none of it was working, but I couldn't stand the way I felt sober, I just was not comfortable in my own skin. And I had that constant sort of just racing heart and anxiety and pacing around until I could get something to calm me down. And then it gets to a point where the tolerance is so high, it's not even doing anything. I'm only using to not get sick, And withdrawals, particularly from opioids, is a horrible thing. It feels like you're going to die. You have every flu symptom to the max. You won't die from it, but it definitely feels like you're going to, and it just lasts day after day after day. It's a miserable experience. I could get into all the war stories, but suffice to say, I think every addict, alcoholic has a book or a movie in them, their life experiences and the horror and the different experiences, whether it be crashing my car into my neighbors when they had a minivan full of kids a mile from our house because I was trying to shoot myself up, as I was approaching a stoplight and rear-ended them, one thing after the next. And November 23rd, 2000, I guess it would have been November 22nd, 2008, we were up at my parents' going to church, and I used to put a mixture in like Visine or eye drop bottles of a solution that was half crack and half opioids, usually oxycodone. And I would, have a syringe with me and just use that to fill up and then just kind of carry it in my pocket throughout the day. I also ended up, this person I was getting my Dilaudid from threw in some Valium, and I hadn't really, I didn't really know the strength of them. I had Xanax here and there, and that also became a problem later on, but with the benzos. But I mixed, anyway, it was a concoction of basically speedballing with the Visine solution, Valium, and I had dropped my family off at the church and then raced over to a Jewel, which was like a mile away, to get a bottle of vodka. And, because again, that obsession was in overdrive. And no matter how risky the situation or how suspicious the circumstances, I had to get it. I had lost that power of choice. I was sipping off the alcohol. Eventually we made it back home to here in Bloomington in the afternoon. And I was, kind of passed out for most of the drive. My wife was driving at this point. In fact, it was very rare that I would have my car keys or my wallet because as a family member, desperate to try and help your loved one, you run out of options, when doctors and medications and psychiatrists aren't doing the trick. You just take the keys away. That'll keep them at home. Of course, I would always find a way, whether it was scraping up quarters to get a cab or using a credit card number, that I'd written down, driving my bike to a gas station, on dangerous roads to get a bottle, Anyway, so I fell out in the shower and woke up in an ER. On this particular night, my wife, who loves Rick Springfield, was going to have a girls' night where he was playing here in town. she was all excited about it. They had backstage passes. She was actually going to meet Rick Springfield, and I, of course, being the selfish alcoholic and addict, chose that night to basically overdose. Woke up in a nearby hospital. Her friends were there. My mother-in-law was there. My parents were on their way down, and that was kind of like the gig is up. You need to get help. You know, it was sort of my intervention. And I ended up going to treatment over at a hospital here in town. Started November 23rd, 2008. And I was scared, you know. I was trying to get out of even my first few days there. I'd call home and say that I just can't be here. My roommate's sketchy, or I'd come up with any kind of excuse. And there was a staff member there. His name's Brendan, and he talked me off the ledge. He's a great guy. I still see him, you know, to this day now and again. In fact, we had a chance for about a year to work together at a treatment center years later. All the respect in the world for this guy. And he was, you know, we look back on our recovery journeys at the different people that have helped us along the way, and I'd say he was definitely one of the first, along with another guy there named Alan. Whatever was said, my mindset shifted. So that was about 9 days in. Sometimes, you know, working in a treatment center now, observing peers, people kind of hit that wall around that time frame where it feels like they've been there a long time, but they still have, you know, 2.5 weeks to go or whatever it might be, and they just want out. You know, it's like, well, I've never had 9 days sober in 17 years. You know, I've got this. I'm ready. You know, you start feeling better. I had no idea what I was in for, you know, in the years to come. I finished that program. I did everything that was asked of me. The last 10 days really flew by, were fun, you know, just for the first time in the longest time, just laughing, you know, hysterically over the silliest things, having fun in sobriety. It was a great experience. Most of my life I've been able to get by situations with procrastination, with some level of cunning or maneuverability, whether it be exams, you know, in college, trouble with relationships, and then kind of like, you know, at the 11th hour stepping up and doing the right thing and showing, you know, my remorse, you know, or whatever it might be. What I didn't realize with the disease, having 1 foot in, 1 foot out is not going to cut it. I got out. I had a sponsor who I'd met in treatment. I was going to meetings. I got a home group right away. And I received my 30-day medallion on Christmas Eve with my parents, my brother, my wife, my daughter were all there. It was a Christmas Eve gratitude meeting at a local hospital with like 60, 75 people, and it was a wonderful experience. And then what happens is, you know, there's this thing called pink cloud, right? And what it really is just this feeling that, oh my gosh, everything is going to be okay. You know, what it really is God's grace starting to work in our life. You know, we start feeling better. We start having some, you know, motivation. It's like, why didn't I do this years ago? You know, this is the greatest thing to ever happen to me. And then we really don't give the credit. We take the credit ourselves, and we kind of just coast along, expecting that feeling to last. You know, and not really putting in taking all the actions that are necessary, and start, you know, skipping meetings, blowing off calls with sponsor, not trying to, you know, continue working the steps, or delaying a 4-step or 9-step, whatever it might be. And those old feelings of restlessness, irritability, discontentment start creeping back in. And then that obsession comes back to drink, to use. And as addicts, alcoholics, when we have the obsession to drink or use, guess what we do, right? You know, when I'm feeling that anxiety, when I'm having trouble getting out of bed, when I hear the birds chirping, and it's like, oh God, here we go again, another day I gotta face, you know. I end up celebrating my 60 days of sobriety by getting an 8-ball of crack, driving to Iowa. And, you know, my mindset was, well, alcohol is my main drug of choice. You know, yeah, opioids were too, but by then I was doing some medication-assisted treatment that sort of negated the opioids option, which was a good thing. You know, that wasn't going to have any sort of effect on crack. And so my mindset was, as long as I'm not using opiates or alcohol, I'm still sober. You know, trouble is, once I start feeding crack back into my veins, the only thing I want to do is find something to calm me down, you know, which would be alcohol or, you know, benzos, that kind of thing. And so March of 2009, I was back at the same treatment center. I was there about a week, and this is when we started talking about like long-term treatment or sober living. I tried in the fall. My wife finally said, you can't be in the house. We have a young daughter. She's still finding bottles. I was still, it's pretty easy to tell when I'm under the influence of anything. I was going to do, or I did outpatient up in Chicago while living in a sober living. That didn't work out. I ended up showing up to the family night with a .36 blood alcohol level. I'd been drinking all throughout the day, shooting crack, and I thought I was fine. I got myself into the city, got myself there, and lo and behold, people somehow actually smelled alcohol on me. I took the breathalyzer thinking I'd be fine, and I was under the .36 was my alcohol level. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. 2010, I went back to that same treatment center here in town in May 10th of 2010. I checked in. It was a different mindset this time. This time I realized that this disease is kicking my ass, and doing it my way is not going to work. And I ended up getting 2 years of sobriety after that. My first year, I was pretty much all in, working the steps, involved with the home group. We'd go on outing. We went to Founders Day in Akron, Ohio. Together, we'd go up to Starved Rock, which is a place nearby here, and just have and then hit a meeting up in that area. So we'd have these cool sober outings. I was sponsoring guys. I was chairing meetings at the local hospital, CA and AA, secretary of my home group, and life got better, like they said it would. When we work the steps, when we find that spiritual connection and awakening. And at some point I had recovered. The obsession to drink, to use drugs was lifted from me. And I was placed in that position of neutrality where I was able to live life and not need that kind of thing, and actually be able to find some modicum of joy in just the day-to-day routine things that, I went from not being able to go to the gas station, put fuel in my car without having to get loaded, to, being able to go to weddings and vacations and remain sober and hit meetings in those areas. And about a year and a half in, some of my service commitments elapsed. We kind of have this rotation where we want to pass it on to the next person, and I wasn't replacing those with new opportunities. Some meetings that I would go to on weekends I stopped going to, saying, well, I just want some family time, my family needs me around. So basically I was getting complacent. October 2012, I went an entire month without going to a meeting, without calling my sponsor. My sponsor and another guy with 40 years who would end up a couple years later being my sponsor showed up at my doorstep unannounced and said, we're here to save your life. And I knew they were right, and I toed the line, went to a meeting with them that night, went about a week of, sort of being back at meetings, but I was really just going through the motion. I was checked out, I figured, I'd gone the last 5-6 months without really drinking or using, but my mental state was not sober. I was suffering probably from what we call mental insobriety. And then at this point, I was trying to get Xanax from my doctor, trying to get Ritalin, and I would, I'd manipulate, lie about symptoms and that kind of thing. And I was shooting Ritalin, and that's not good because the binders in the pills would cause more abscesses. So, this arm's all scarred to shit. Sorry, Thanksgiving 2012, when I finally picked up that drink, again, I was still telling myself I was sober for these last few months, even though I was messing around with pills, benzos and speed. My defenses were down by Thanksgiving 2012, and I saw a bottle of Grey Goose. My mom asked me to take some, we were at their house for the holiday. She asked me to take some tray of food down to the kitchen in the basement and put it there. Saw this big bottle, one of those big bottles of Grey Goose that was about 3/4 full, so it had been opened, so I'm thinking, I could, take a couple swigs off that, nobody would probably know. And I didn't tell anyone, I didn't call anyone, I didn't talk to my wife about it, I didn't ask my dad to remove it. I just sort of sat on it for the rest of the night, knowing it was there, and then it just, as I was letting that, using thought spin laps in my head and gain strength, it kind of just turned more into a compulsion or obsession that I had to go drink. And I went down at 10:30, everybody was asleep, poured myself a glass, had some kind of juice to chase it down. By the end, that's how I was drinking, cheap vodka and then some kind of lemonade or something. It wasn't like cocktails sitting around, or it wasn't going to a bar, being around people. It was sneaking it in my basement or garage, swigging it as quick as I could. Next day I drank again, so It was at my niece's 1-year birthday party, and I had volunteered to help clean up in the basement. And there were all these half-drinking, wine glasses, and I was swinging them all like Spalding and Caddyshack, Then I went like a week and a half without drinking. I was kind of like, okay, I got that out of my system. It wasn't so great, but now it's sort of back to being in sobriety. I didn't tell anybody about it. Once like I said earlier, once I put that alcohol back in my body, something happens in my brain, and it's just, I need it. I need more of it. And then I got laid off of a job that I had for about 5 years with the Fortune 100 company in December of that year, so right after Thanksgiving. And then all bets were off. I was, back to guzzling a bottle or more a day. I was working from home at that point, so it was just, just really no controls, nobody around until my wife would get home. And I remember the anxiety of, around 4 o'clock when it was time for her to come home with our daughter from daycare. And I'm loaded, I'm sweating my ass off from shooting speed all day, and I've already had like 3 showers and I'm still sweating through my clothes, and then I lay awake at night with my heart racing, because I had nothing to really calm me down. I'm just, pretending like I'm sleeping because I didn't want to have any kind of conversation, just my mind was somewhere else. When you're in that sort of state of mind, you're not able to converse, you're not able to act normal, So early 2013, I went to Rosecrans, a treatment center, for 33 days. Again, great experience, loved my peers, loved everything that was going on. But at this point, I had isolated myself from my home group. I had, while I was using all the speed, I was down to like 155 pounds, and I looked ill. We'd go to holiday functions, and my aunt would pull my wife aside and ask if I had cancer or something. It was like I looked just really unhealthy. I thought I looked great. Hey, I haven't been this weight since high school. And then I see pictures now and just how emaciated I look. And so I was tired of answering questions. If I would get to a meeting, people would be like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? Where have you been? We've missed you." I just didn't want to deal with that. So I started going to other meetings after the Rosecrans treatment in town, where I could be more of a wallflower, where I wouldn't really get involved. I could tell people I'm going to meetings, but really, again, I'm still trying to do it my way, not the program's way. Went on a 1-week binge around June of that year. Anyway, it was treatment centers in and out, for the next 2 years. And I wasn't forgiving myself for losing that sobriety time I had. I guess it was like a year and a half, even though I say 2 years, if you include the Xanax and pills and stuff. By early 2015, bad as ever. Benzos were also part of the picture. I'd have these, I'd forget, weeks at a time. I'd forget that we went to a friend's house for dinner at their house, and I'd ask my wife, how they're doing, the next week, and she'd be like, "What are you talking about? We were just there a few days ago." It was just like real bad. Couldn't get out of bed. Depressed, suffering regularly from withdrawal symptoms from opioids. And the only thing that I could do to get relief was somehow get to a store or gas station to get some vodka and just sip off that, and have it, stashed throughout the house. I was facing, I was stuck in a cycle of process addiction to shoplifting, and I had multiple arrests from that. I was on bond and on probation for a previous case, and I got arrested again. I was facing 5 to 7 years in prison. First couple times, slap on the hand, and then it kept happening. And that obsession to do that was no different than the obsession to drink. Once it was in my head, I couldn't get rid of it until I completed the act. That was destroying my life. So in addition to the imminent prison time, really not held down a job since I was laid off from that one in December 2012, all sorts of debacles with that. I got a job at corporate at Walgreens, in like 2013. And my first day, I drank so much the night before, I was so sick I couldn't even show up for the first day there. And I was staying at my parents' because it was a job up in Lincolnshire. And I lied and told them that my mother-in-law died. It was actually my brother's mother-in-law who passed. I used that, as an excuse to not go. Went back for like 2 days, and then that Thursday I couldn't go to work. Woke up at like noon because I was drinking heavily till like 3 a.m. that Wednesday night. So that job obviously didn't pan out. I did have a job in Oak Brook for about 6 months. It started good, but I was sober when I started, and then about 2 months in, that obsession, I wasn't going to meetings up there. I was living out of a suitcase during the week, coming home on weekends, and I get homesick pretty easy, And once I started drinking, the performance just went to shit. That's where in my office, I'd have a water bottle full of vodka, an orange juice, in my drawer, and just throughout I'd swig. And then I got some Xanax and mixed that, and one day went into the staff break room in a total blackout. And the only thing I remember is people being like, "Whoa, man, are you okay?" And so the deal was I was going to, go to treatment over Christmas break, take 2 weeks off. I didn't. I drank through that whole time, so lost that job. And then so by 2015, I was working for another big company for about 2 months, started drinking again, was late often because I'd be trying to find a vein before I went in to get high, and I'd spend sometimes 45 minutes in my car just trying to find a vein that I could hit. For a while there, I was going to meetings at noontime, and I was over in Peoria doing okay. But again, once I put that drink back in my body, and I remember this time even having the thought, if you do this over lunch break, go into a liquor store, and if you do this, it's over, And I still did it because in that moment, I needed that relief. I couldn't stand the way I was feeling. And even though I knew by this point, that picking up a drink was going to create a shitstorm and I'd probably lose a job and this might be the final straw in divorce and my legal stuff's going to go to shit because, one thing that wasn't going to help me was also, getting drunk and using drugs, but I still did it. So for a couple of years, my family had been talking to me about long-term treatment. Counselors had been talking to me about it. I kept putting it off. Finally realized I'm done, facing my wife, college sweetheart. We met as sophomores at Purdue, had seen a divorce attorney. I was facing the prison time. I hadn't really held a job in 2 years after a good 15-year career. And those were like some of the external things going on, but inside I was so damaged and crippled by the fear, and it manifests as anxiety disorder, depression. I was on all these different medications, seeing these different psychiatrists, these different rapid detox approaches that just were, none of it was working. And the reason for that is outside issues will not get the real alcoholic or addict sober. That stuff will help. Seeing a therapist, working on communication issues, working on anger or relationship problems, That's all. If I'm not trying to diss that at all, that's great stuff and I endorse it. But for the alcoholic, the addict, the reason we relapse is two things. We don't know the problem and we don't know the solution. And that was my case for years. I'd hear it, but it wasn't registering. I was still convinced I could do it my way. And so I finally went to this long-term place called the Hanley Center at Origins in West Palm Beach. Next to getting married and having a child, it was the top 3 experience of my life. I was down there 4 months, 2 months inpatient and 2 months in a transitions home that they ran and had staff on site and took us to meetings, took us to campus for groups. They'd have these big book groups in the morning where they'd bring in guests and staff members to break down the AA big book. They give incentives for working steps. They would have guest speakers every night. A lot of them were alumni who would come in. And they really just cultivated this village or community of recovery. A wonderful experience. This pink cloud that I'd had before where I'd be feeling like, man, I really want recovery and I could pass any lie detector and I'm starting to feel something, They described it, like a guy named Chris R. who would work down there, described it as that is not just this thing that, where you just keep kind of, doing whatever and you're going to ride this sort of wave into sobriety and a happy lifetime. He explained that goes away, but it is a window of opportunity and you found something and it's really God working in your life right now, whether you realize it or not. And the way to keep it is by taking action and go sharing with the next alcoholic or addict. My head was spinning by the time I was down there from things I'd hear in meetings, things I'd hear from doctors, things I'd read in self-help books, things I thought were best for me, things the others thought were best for me, family members, whatever. And they did a great job of just simplifying the solution. They said, you need to decide if you're really an alcoholic or an addict for yourself. And the best way to tell is what happens to you when you put that stuff in your body. Can you go to the local bar room and just have 2 drinks, on a regular occasion and stop? Or once you put it in your body, are you drinking more than you intended to? Are you losing control of what's going to happen, with some regularity? And the answer is yes, I am a real alcoholic, because something happens to me, physically and mentally and spiritually when I introduce that stuff in my body. And say if that's the case, then only a spiritual awakening will relieve your condition. And we recommend the 12 steps because that's still the best game in town. The steps are simply time-tested spiritual principles that have helped people feel connected, feel bigger than, feel a sense of purpose, feel connection to something bigger than themselves since the cradle of civilization, right? When you feel that spiritual awakening, you go help the next alcoholic or addict who needs it. You carry the message. And so instead of work on your communication, work on your anger, work on this issue, you need to be better at that. You need to work on your marriage, being a better father. All this stuff that other treatment centers kind of had me focusing on. This place said, find a spiritual awakening through the steps and go help another alcoholic or addict, and you will recover. They didn't say you're recovering every day for the rest of your life and you're always sick and oh my God, you can never say that you're recovered because you're always walking this tightrope and there's this fiery pit of relapse abyss underneath you, and if anything goes wrong then you're going to be sort of fall off that tightrope into relapse hell. It was the opposite. It's like you get to a point where it's the 10-step promise. The problem is removed. You're placed in a position of neutrality. You just don't think about drugs and alcohol any different than you do what book you want to read or what show you want to watch when you get home or what route you want to take home from work or whatever. It's just not that constant driving force in the back of your head or forefront of your mind, really. They give us incentives. We get beach outings if we did a 4-step, or a 5th step. By the time I moved into transitions home, I had already done, so 2 months in, basically, I had done my 4-step. They'd have us hear other peers' 5th steps once you become like a senior peer, so I'd hear all these other people doing their 1st, 4th, and 5th steps, and I'd listen to them and kind of play the role of like a sponsor, which was a great experience. Just a wonderful place. It's dual diagnosis, so they got, I'd see a psychiatrist on staff there regularly, got my medications squared away. And it turned out I didn't need 6 or 7 different medications for depression, anxiety. I really just needed a couple. And because a book says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Now, I'm saying that from my own experience. I realize there are a lot of people in recovery who need medication for depression and have that chemical imbalance. I'm not giving advice either way about medication. There's still a couple medications I take to this day that were prescribed me down there. But getting that, realizing that it wasn't that I was depressed or had these anxiety disorders. It was that I was suffering from a spiritual illness, right? And so while I was down there, I started to feel my spirit awaken, smelling the roses and seeing the beauty in life and grace all around me, going on these walking meditations and the palm trees and the different kind of, animals and birds down there, and connecting with people again and just having fun, laughing. What it did was, one, gave me hope. I had this gift of desperation going down there that this is my shot. All these consequences I'm facing, the prison, the divorce, the unemployment, inward, fear, and just being so stuck. I was looking at it that I have to try it a different way, and I'm going to practice total surrender, and I'm not going to have any notions to share about how long I'm going to be down there, or whether or not I should do sober living, or all these things that I'd resisted in the past. They recommended I get extended to 45 days, fine. They recommended I get extended to 60 days, great. They recommended transition living, thank God my parents were there to help pay for that, because my insurance had run out after the first month. I had sold $40,000 worth of old comic books that I had. I had cashed in my 401k, and I still wanted to stay down there, and my dad stepped up, and they came down for a week, a family week, of just really intensive family treatment. That was also an amazing experience. We just talked about it over Christmas Day last month, just what a moving and powerful and important experience that was for all of us, not only to realize that they need to recover themselves, and it's not about I'll recover or I won't, but it's up to them to empower their own recovery journey as a family member. So much more I could say about it, but for the sake of time, one of my friends in recovery here owns a farm, and he gave me a job around minimum wage, making cheese and working on the farm, cleaning trays and picnic benches. There's that part of me, the old part of me, that's like, well, I used to travel to Europe, and do conferences and speak, presentations and that kind of thing. And, I'm being bossed around by high schoolers now, where I've never even worked on a farm, or probably barely even been on one. But then there was the part that, of me that God had made himself present, where I'd go to the picnic bench and I'd sit there for a minute and I would just thank him, pour out with gratitude that I had this opportunity, not only to just prove to myself really that I could be accountable, that I could put in an honest day's work, that I could be relied upon, that I was employable basically. For a while there, it was just like, what is wrong with me? I keep screwing up every great opportunity I have. I did that for a while, and eventually I ended up working at a local treatment center part-time with the adolescents. After about a year, I was promoted to a full-time clinician, which was like a dream situation. It was an amazing opportunity they gave me. I also had to go to jail. I had a lot of damage control to do. At about 11 months sober, I went to jail. In that 5 years that I was facing, minimum, I showed up in front of the judge. I had reference letters from people in the recovery community, people I went to treatment with, and I think they just saw a difference. My lawyer told me they didn't expect me to finish it, even though I had to get permission to leave the state from 2 different judges. And I think they just saw the difference. I was active in the recovery. I was sponsoring people by then. I just was doing what was suggested. And they ended up giving me 30 days with time served, and day for day, I ended up that 5, 6, 7 year prison bid ended up turning into 12 days. Tell me that's not God working in my life and a gift of recovery, right? We're doing a counseling group, and one of them says, well, page 417, nothing happens in God's world by mistake. And it was like, holy shit, man, that is amazing. These kids suddenly are scrambling, have 2 weeks to find a place to be. They can't really go home. The reason they're there is their home situation is not stable or safe. They haven't built the networks for finding a place. They don't really have the independent living skills. So they have a lot of doubts. And we're just talking in this group about how this is God's will, and we're all going to land on our feet. It's going to be okay. And shortly after, I did end up getting accepted to a position with the adults. So I did 2 years on a residential unit as what they call a shift supervisor. I was able to teach groups, connect with newcomers regularly, take them to meetings, just engage, have fun, and try and share my experience with people whose seat I was in, many times and not too long ago, just a few years back. Became a recovery support specialist working with the ROSC in a local court program in November 2018. I've been in that role since. May 11th, 2015 is my sober date, so coming up on 6 years. Never thought that was possible. I didn't think for a while 24 hours was possible, but this program, the gifts it just keeps giving, repairing my marriage, repairing my relationship with family. We just moved into a new home, a dream home that never would have been possible when I was still drinking and using. That was something we wanted to do years ago, but there was just no stability. When you have a spouse who's constantly, chronically relapsing, there are no long-term plans. Everything is just fear-based and day-to-day. Chair a regular meeting. My home group is on Monday nights. Have a service position with them. I chair a regular Bridges All Recovery meeting on Thursday nights. We can get the Zoom information on the screen, hopefully here. The best advice I got, in order to get it, you got to give it away, right? In other words, usually you hear in order to keep it, you got to give it away. That's true too. But I was taught at this treatment center, it's all about taking action immediately. The reason people stayed sober back in the days at much higher rates, when AA was first founded, is because they didn't have all these meetings. They didn't have treatment centers. They didn't have, people who went to treatment 7, 8 times. They had the steps, and they had the ability to work with others. You got 2 weeks, of sobriety time, recovery time. You got something to offer. Go help this guy or gal who can't get 24 hours, And it was that kind of motivation they instilled. You have a sponsor who's letting you go 9 months without doing a 4-step, find somebody else. It was about taking action, getting in the middle of this thing, and following those basic suggestions, meetings, prayer and meditation, working with other alcoholics and addicts, reading the literature, having a sponsor to work through the steps with. And so we get to a point where we just incorporate the steps into our life on a day-to-day basis. One of the last things I'll say is there was one quote I heard, down there that stuck with me. I think it's Thomas Jefferson. It said, in order to get somewhere you've never been to before, you need to do something you've never done before. And then there's a line on page 76 that was kind of a mantra, going into jail, going into these difficult situations, particularly early in sobriety where there was a lot of uncertainty. It says, remember, it was agreed in the beginning that we were willing to go to any length for victory over alcoholism. And the reason I love that line is instills this, reminds me what it was like when I was suffering in those first few weeks of that car drive down where my sponsor drove me from Bloomington to West Palm Beach, and I was detoxing from alcohol, from opiates, and just wanted to jump out of the car and full of fear about what that treatment experience would be like. Didn't really know for sure that I had it in me, doubted that I could even recover, thought maybe I was constitutionally capable. That line reminds me, in that moment, in those early days, or when you had that sort of pink cloud start of that window of opportunity, you committed to doing total surrender and doing everything that was required for victory over this disease. And you know from experience, complacency, lapsing on things that work for you will cause you to get sick again. So just as that little nudge, wake up, you don't want to meet with the sponsee, or you're in the middle of something and a sponsee calls, or you're supposed to call your sponsor, just whatever it is I don't feel like doing, just that little, line reminds me, hey, you already made this commitment. Look at all the gifts you've gotten in these last 5.5 years. Keep doing the work. And the recovery gifts just continue to come in. It's, we say thank God I'm an alcoholic and addict because I have a life today that I never could have imagined. I remember laying awake during that stinking thinking, what is my legacy? What am I really giving to this planet? If I were to die tomorrow, which seemed likely at that time or possible, what are people going to say about me? What was my purpose? All I did was take, and lie and manipulate and put on this mask that I was this nice guy, Recovery's given me, a purpose. It's given me a legacy that I think I could be proud of. It's given me the ability to try and help others, and that's really all I could ever ask for. So I guess that's all I have. There's more to it, but this is probably long enough. I appreciate if you made it to this point. Thank you so much. I'm extremely grateful for your time. And hopefully you'll come back to see some more stories on this channel by other recoveries and just any other videos. And if you want to reach out to the ROSC, we're at McLean County ROSC at chestnut.org. Love you. Thank you very much.